Hello, and thanks for joining us on this post-AUSA webinar. I'm Nick Brown, the editor of International Defence Review, and I'll be moderating this session. As you can tell, I picked a bit of a cold up on the plane back from Washington, but bear with me and I'll keep my bit brief and try to keep my snivelling and coughing to a minimum. We've also got a bit of a challenge with some of the storm that hit the east coast of the States yesterday, and we may have some of our speakers dropping in and out, but we will do our best to make it all seamless. This is the team that we have assembled. We've got a good selection of news, reference, and on our forecasting team here. So hopefully we'll get some good insights out of what people collected from the show. Our post-show events are a bit more relaxed and ad hoc than our more structured events. So if you've got any questions or areas that you'd like us to discuss, please just ask away during the presentations using the dialogue chat boxes on the right of your display. Please direct them to me as the moderator, and I'll either answer them straight away over text or field them in a Q&A session at the end. Before we begin properly, I'd like to stress that if you have any issues with the audio, then please call in by clicking the request telephone icon above the chat window and following the on-screen instructions that will pop up. You might also want to close down as many applications as possible, apart from your web browser, of course, to reduce the chances of any other interference. So, going through my thoughts and collecting them from my experience of AUSA this year, it seemed that superficially, although it was as big as ever with exhibits sprawled across 2 floors for the second year in a row, part of that was presumably a result of industry's long-term commitment to buying space at the show, because one of my abiding impressions was just how flat and quiet it seemed. There's usually a vibrant air to AUSA with new technologies at every turn and uniforms very much in evidence, but not this year. Delegate numbers were clearly down, and everywhere there was talk of the lack of army attendance, and the real elephant in the room was the looming horror of sequestration, of course. But no doubt Dan will go into that more later. There was new technology to be found, however, and stories to be hunted down as ever, but it was in no way the abundant show that it usually is. Previous shows have had clear themes, from the MRAP phenomenon to communications and networking revolutions over the last few events, for example. But this year, if anything, the theme seemed to be a push to reassure everybody that despite looming spending cuts and the knock-on effects of withdrawing from Afghanistan, that everything was going to be all right. Where over the last 5 or 6 years, armoured vehicles have been very much in evidence at the show, this year there were more earth movers, logistics trucks, and utility-type vehicles. Perhaps that's a sign in itself of the US Army and land forces in other countries coming to terms with the return to operations away from the exceptional requirements of the Afghan theatre. One area that I did find quite interesting was the growth in autonomy insertion and optional manning technologies that were in evidence at the show, particularly for convoy operations. The cost in lost lives and material of convoy operations into Iraq and Afghanistan clearly casts a long shadow, and several of the big players were involved with convoy-type technologies and optional manning, looking to remove or minimize the number of drivers and co-drivers or convoy teams that were involved, getting men out of harm's way and helping to reduce the costs of running the cargo. Oshkosh, Lockheed Martin, General Dynamics were amongst a slew of companies showing off their technologies, and there were several others that were fully autonomous route finding, electro-optical or RIFID leader-follower type devices, and even physical tethers for a form of smart towing in the shape of GD's offering, with sensors picking up the relative resistance and tension on a cable between vehicles. Another obvious theme was base protection, emphasizing the growth of networked EO sensors and integrated battle management systems linked to remote weapon stations and precision weapons with which to retaliate against mortar and rocket crews. So CRAM and crew protection are very much still a key concern of both developers and acquisition officials. Those are just my impressions, though, of the show, and I think that Pete is going to pick up a couple of details in terms of the crew protection angle. So without further ado, I'll hand over to him.
Okay, thanks, Nick. Yeah, I'd go along with what Nick was saying, really. There, the one impression that I got overall from the show was that although it didn't actually seem smaller in its footprint, and some of the CEOs I talked to were saying that certain people dropping out had in fact given room to some companies that wanted to come in but initially hadn't come in, and of course it's true that these companies do book up for these events years in advance. So when we see an effect on budgets and spending, it does take a couple of years for that to filter through to major shows like Farnborough, the Paris Air Show, Eurosatory, and now AUSA. So looking around the show, there were a couple of interesting things that I certainly picked up. When we're going around and we're not seeing major defence orders or major program progress, we tend to end up looking somewhat under the rocks for stories. But there were some interesting things, and I'm just going to point to a couple of them here. Now, this first one, this was just coming out of a briefing, an update briefing that I had with BAE Systems on its APKWS-2 program. This is in light of this weapon system having an initial operational capability declared back in March. And probably the most newsworthy aspect of this is the fact that, well, probably by now they've passed the 100 mark in terms of these weapons systems being fired in Afghanistan. In case you're somewhat unfamiliar with the weapon, it's effectively a guidance kit, a laser guidance kit that is added to a standard airborne 2.75-inch rocket that turns that weapon into a precision munition at much less the cost of an equivalent Hellfire air-to-ground missile, for example. And one of the interesting things about this particular weapon, the BAE Systems solution, because there are many such guidance kits out there converting rockets into guidance munitions, but the BAE system is the only one actually out there in service. When the fins of this missile deploy, and you can see them in the picture there, the seekers are actually on the ends of, kind of in the middle of the fin. And what that means is that while the rocket is in the tube, it's not getting damaged in any way, being flown around on helicopters, and then it's fired, and those snap out, and then they lock onto the whatever is being lased. So it's interesting technology. It's the first actually deployed. At the moment, its capability has been declared on the AH-1W Super Cobra attack helicopter, and its cousin, the UH-1Y Venom utility helicopter. One of the interesting things to actually come out of this briefing was that there is in fact a joint capability technology demonstration contract in place, both for the Aviate-B Harrier II and also the US Air Force's A-10 Thunderbolt II. That's not necessarily news. We have reported that before, but the guy I spoke to said that they're also looking to actually prove out that weapon so that it can also be compatible with the FA-18 and the F-16. And that's going to be interesting how that progresses, because we're talking about true fast air there, whereas at the moment this is just on quite low-flying helicopters that aren't firing at anything like the speed that an F-16 perhaps would be. Another thing that's interesting to note is that there is what is called a rapid deployment capability initiative for this weapon to be integrated onto the MQ-8B Fire Scout, which is a rotary wing UAV. That's going to be the first instance of the US Navy weaponizing a UAV, and beyond that there is an RDC capability for it to be fitted on the MH-60. And the interesting thing to note about that one is that the fit will see 16 to 19 rounds per station put on the helicopter, which would theoretically give it up to 38 shots per sortie. And that's much more than one of the helicopters that currently carries the weapon system would ordinarily carry. And so this is possibly a sort of like a sea-based solution to perhaps a swarming boat attack, for example. So interesting to see how that progresses. Nick, go on to the next one, please. Right. Now, this is interesting in the sense that this is a European active protection system. Most of the headway with this kind of system, which actively defends against incoming rockets and missiles, defending various armoured fighting vehicles, most of the headway has been made by the Israelis, and there are a few other systems out there, but this is a system being developed by Kraus Maffei Wegmann. They call it the Active Schutz System. They're not really making much of that as a name because the abbreviation is ARS, and that doesn't really play very well in the market. They don't really know exactly what they're going to call it yet, but what they have developed are these elements, and you can just see at the top of that picture, that is one of the 30 centimetre long elements. And what would happen is those would be strung together and put in a crown around the top of a vehicle. The system would be tied up with a range of sensors. KMW believe that about 6 sensors would be the optimum amount for a vehicle, say the size of a Kraus Maffei Wegmann Dingo armoured patrol vehicle. That would be effectively one sensor on each corner of the vehicle and one on either side. And what happens is when the sensors detect the incoming round, a block of 3 of these elements will be ignited. They will direct a blast downward, and they defeat the incoming round. And those blasts are effective from 4 centimetres to 2.5 meters, and they will effectively blast the warhead of the incoming round just before it's about to strike the vehicle. So at the current stage, KMW are at a situation where they're going to have to spend quite a bit of money developing it. So they brought it to AUSA to talk to the customer, to try and get some backing for actually moving the concept forward, and actually putting it into a technology demonstrator program. And the KMW spokesman that I spoke to said that they had in fact received that confirmation from the customer from the show, and they would be going into some more detailed talks. So if those are successful, then we could eventually end up with a European-born active protection system. Okay, next one, Nick. This is the last story that I'm going to highlight, and it's very interesting from a technology point of view. It's actually a collaboration between Polaris Defence and M9 Defence, and what it produces is, as I said there, an alternative solution, armouring solution, to what is normally done, where you applicate armour kits to military vehicles. The problem with that being that they end up being a lot heavier. And of course, once you've made the vehicle that much heavier, then you've got to upgrade the power plant and the suspension, and it causes all kinds of problems. This solution actually is, the technology solution is in 2 parts. Part of it is the armour, which is a hybrid steel composite armour. That's a proprietary solution. And added to that is M9's Boraclave press technology, which is an advanced form of hydroforming. Now, this process has normally been used up until now for smaller products, such as helmets and armoured plates for body armour. But what they're doing is they're actually scaling that process up to the extent that you can actually make auto parts like the doors of a Humvee, for example, out of the material, and actually use it to put the vehicle together. And they had on their stand exactly what you can see in the image there, which is a Humvee demonstrating the technology. And what they're saying is that whereas the current high-tech applique armour, which often involves sort of ceramic armour solutions, are actually weighing about 23 pounds per square foot to get them to STANAG level 3, what they're looking at is about 14.5 pounds per square foot, using what they describe as non-exotic materials. Now, if you translate that to something like the Humvee you see there, you're talking about a vehicle which is going to weigh about 7,500 to 8,000 pounds, compared to 13,500 to 14,000 pounds for a conventionally up-armoured Humvee. Now, what you can do with that, you can raise the vehicle's payload, obviously, for the same protection level. You don't necessarily have to upgrade the engine and suspension, but that would be up to the customer. And there are other survivability solutions that then become an option because you've made that weight saving. So again, this is very new technology. It was really very much them introducing this technology to an audience. That's why they picked the displaying the Humvee, which was quite a distinctive looking vehicle, sort of all black and silver and quite sort of glammed up. And although they don't really have a business model, they haven't nailed down any costs, what they have said is it will certainly be competitive with regard to existing armoured systems out there. And they were just looking to engage the customer and bring that technology forward. So that's potentially a very interesting future armour solution. I think that's me done, so I'll hand back on to Nick to introduce the next speaker.
Well, actually, it's straight across to John Hawkes, one of our forecast analysts.
Good afternoon, everyone. One of the first things that I took away from the show is that the GMV 1.1 program, which I think is quite an interesting program for those who aren't familiar with it. It's looking to purchase around 1,300 vehicles to replace some of SOCOM's modified lightweight Humvees it's been using with a stealthier, faster and more mobile vehicle. The focus is really on a bespoke SF vehicle. Armour isn't even an initial requirement, with the main concerns being that it be a high-speed, high-mobility and importantly modular design. Additionally, it needs to fit inside of a Chinook so that when the helicopter lands, operators can roll off and immediately start their mission with no needs for preparation or unpacking of vehicles. What was most interesting to me at AUSA at this stage was the hugely diverse offerings that seem to be appearing to the programme, ranging from Northrop Grumman's pretty big, sort of almost Dakar racer style MAV-L, which you can see in the top right there, to Navistar's far more traditional looking SOTV, in the top left, a 4x4 crew cab pickup design. GD have a relatively small, almost sort of dune buggy style design, and AM General have an open-top Humvee, which seems to be a gradual development over the existing GMV, which they supplied. All except Northrop Grumman seem to be focusing on a 4-man crew, with Northrop's offering actually having the ability to get up to 15 guys on the vehicle, although I suspect you wouldn't want to travel very far like that. It's unclear whether these pretty divergent approaches are because the requirements have perhaps not been specified very well and there's too much room for interpretation, but there certainly seems to be quite a lot of competition with everyone throwing in a design of some kind. All the designs have been highly modular, and aside from the MAV-L significantly higher crew capacity, another advantageous bid I saw looks to be Navistar's SOTV, which shares more than 60% commonality with their bid for the non-standard commercial vehicle program, which is looking to procure potentially as many as 3,000 light utility patrol vehicles for Special Forces use. That vehicle will be discreetly armoured to B6 Plus and provides sort of a more covert alternative to the distinctly fighty-looking GMV vehicles. None of the other contenders, from what I saw or from the people I spoke to, seem to have identified or targeted this second program, the potential commonality angle that it could bring. So that could well be a good advantage for Navistar. My other takeaway from the show was cost saving. I'm sure people will agree, we've heard from Nick and Peter, that the show was quite quiet and reserved. And I saw a few initiatives to try and make the most of these rather austere times. First up is AMPV or AMPV, which is the well-known program to replace the Army's M113s and has two companies pursuing it at the moment, GD and BAE. They're both offering takes on existing vehicles, BAE looking to provide a turretless Bradley, taking advantage of a sizable surplus fleet to do so, which would bring savings through commonality with the Bradleys in the existing fleet, and then GD with either a wheeled or potentially a tracked conversion of the Striker, although in their case it would be entirely new build and not make any use of existing fleets. Both are boasting the commonality angle and the savings inherent in that. I think on the face of it, Bradley makes more sense as the AMP-V will be operating with M2 and M3s in the heavy brigade combat teams, whereas obviously a Striker design, although better than a bespoke vehicle, won't be a part of the Striker brigade combat team, so the HBCT would still be carrying an extra platform's worth of logistical burden. General Dynamics seems to be pursuing the cost savings line the most at the show. They presented a variety of initiatives, the first of which was the dieselisation of the M1, which they've tested with an MTU engine and Allison transmission and showed a 14% cost per mile saving, and more significantly a 50% increase in range, alongside a variety of other benefits such as a drastic reduction in the thermal signature by moving away from a gas turbine. The engine would be the same as their GCV offering, so obviously if they won that, then there would be a good commonality brought into the HBCTs there as well. A further saving, they said, could be achieved through the wheeled Striker winning AMP-V. Their figures showed it to be the most cost-effective vehicle in the US fleet, costing around $17 a mile in comparison to the Bradley's $48 a mile. Just looking at those two initiatives together, a full HBCT brigade would save around $19,000 a mile. The figure would be around $15,000 if AMP-V were a tracked Striker rather than a wheeled one. As well as that, they also showed their new Super Buffalo, which adds GPR onto the front of the regular Buffalo to reduce a vehicle in the route clearance package, as well as removing personnel from being in close proximity of IEDs. Their longer-term Phase 2 initiative to the Super Buffalo was quite interesting, which makes it a C2 vehicle commanding up to 4 remote-controlled Ocelots, or Ocelots as they're calling them at the moment, which would have GPR interrogation arms and neutralisation charges on them, essentially removing any human from the close proximity of IEDs in route clearance, and further reducing the number of heavy MRAP vehicles. This would hopefully reduce, obviously, fuel costs further and the personnel required to operate the route clearance teams. And that's me. Handing over to Chris Foss for some more vehicles.
Thank you. I think what people should realise is that the AUSA programme is quite different to Eurosatory and DSEI. Both of those rely very heavily on delegations coming from overseas, which have escort officers to show them around to contractors, and indeed the delegation can ask questions on who they want to see. So they are different programs. The AUSA this year was very quiet, but there are a number of interesting programs which more information came out of. First of all, as previously mentioned, the ground combat vehicle is a major US Army program. General Dynamics really haven't said much about it, but at AUSA, BA Systems did give some details of the hybrid electric drive system for the ground combat vehicle. The BA Systems hybrid drive features a very compact MTU diesel in each sponson and the kinetic EX drive, which is a scaled up version of that used in the now defunct future combat system. This is claimed not only to save a considerable amount of volume inside of the vehicle, but also be much more reliable, as it will have far fewer parts than a conventional mechanical drive system. Indeed, according to BA Systems, it will have 40% fewer moving parts, which is expected to lead to a significant increase in reliability. And tracked vehicles' reliability has always been somewhat of a killer. And people don't realise the old power pack takes up a lot of volume in the hull, and if you can split that, it saves a lot more space. So I think by using hybrid electric drive, they created more volume inside, and that's what people want. Key elements of the hybrid electric drive are already being demonstrated in the static test bed, which is being referred to as Hot Buck, which is already running in California. It should also be noted that the hybrid electric drive system, slightly different, was also used in the BA System SEP family of tracked and wheeled vehicles, which was subsequently cancelled. This also featured compact diesel engines in the sponsons, one on either side. The other thing that came out was we have talked something about the German defensive aid systems. Well, Trophy is now in service with the Israel Defense Force on the Merkava Mark IV, and the prime contractor of that is Rafael. This shows the latest production Merkava Mark IV. All production Merkavas are now being fitted with the Trophy hard kill defensive aid system, as it leaves the production line. The first Mark IVs were not fitted, but all earlier ones have been backfitted, and all new tanks, as they roll off the production line, are being fitted with this hard-kill DAS. The first order was for 100 systems, and it is understood that a second order has now been placed for an undisclosed quantity of systems, which could be as high as 200, which will be sufficient for another 2 Merkava Mark IV brigades. For the US market, Raphael is teamed with DRS Technologies. Israel Military Industries has developed the Iron Fist active defense system, and this is being marketed in the US by General Dynamics. At one time, it was expected that Iron Fist would be integrated onto an Amur heavy infantry fighting vehicle, but this has not occurred, and today the vehicle does not have a defensive aid system. In the past, there has been talk of combining the best features of Trophy and Iron Fist into a common hard-kill DAS, but so far this has not occurred. The US Army record on self-propelled artillery systems has been dismal, to say the least. And over the last 20 years, many programs have been cancelled, including the very advanced Crusader 155mm system, as it was considered too heavy. Within the defunct Future Combat system, where there was a non-line of sight cannon and a long line of sight mortar, but both of these were cancelled before being fielded. NLOC, in fact, was armed with a 155 38 cal weapon fed by an automatic ammunition handling system. Today, the M109 is still the standard SP gun of the US Army, and its origins can trace back to the 1950s, well before many of the crews were even born. The current one is the M109A6 Paladin, of which a total of 975 were delivered. This was in fact an upgraded earlier M109 with a slightly modified hull and a brand new turret which incorporated the 39 cal 155 weapon, as you see here. This will be supplemented and eventually replaced by the M109A6 Paladin Integrated Management, which essentially consists of the new hull, power pack and suspension, fitted with a modified Paladin turret. A total of 5 M109A6 PIM and 2 of the associated M99A2 field artillery ammunition support vehicles have been built, and these have undergone contractor trials with limited user trials starting by the US Army on the 1st of November. If this program goes to plan, expected a total of 586 sets will be supplied to the US Army, each set consisting of 1 Paladin and 1 field artillery ammunition support vehicle. One of the more unusual vehicles come to Washington was the System XP2. This has been developed as a private venture by Nexter and was first shown in public late in 2011. This was brought to AUSA as a potential contender for the Armoured Multipurpose Vehicle, which is a high priority program to replace the M113 used by the Heavy Brigade Combat System. Nexter is still in production of the VBCI for the French Army, with Renault Trucks Defence supplying the complete driveline. This particular vehicle is all a Nexter Systems product, with Renault Trucks Defence having actually nothing to do with the vehicle. The French Army have a number of emerging programs which perhaps this could be a contender for. There are a number of armoured security vehicles at AUSA, and this shows the production line at the Textron facility, and they have been producing 48 vehicles a month for years, on time and on budget. Production will soon be completed with the US Army, and including exports, well over 3,400 have now been built. Export contracts have been made to Afghanistan, Bulgaria, Iraq, Colombia, and more recently has been selected to meet the Canadian requirement for a tactical armoured patrol vehicle with 500 to be supplied. At AUSA, the company brought back the old name of Commando. This originally was fitted to the V100 vehicles, the V150, the V200. They're all referred to the Commando. So for the export market, they are referred as the Commando family of vehicles. In fact, there are now 3 distinct families. The Commando Advance is used by the US Army, the Commando Select used by the African National Army, and Commando Elite used by Canada. All these are 4x4 with different configurations, particularly on armour. Shown last year for the first time was the Madiscoop Hawkeye 105mm soft recoilless weapon, and that did attract a lot of interest. I think at last AUSA they'd only fired a relatively small number of rounds, but by this time they'd cranked up and fired over 250 rounds, both in the indirect fire mission role and also in the direct fire role. And for those who visited the stand, they were engaging and knocking out targets in the direct fire range at a range of about 1,400 metres. Although the first one is a 105, it could also be scaled up to 155mm. There's no US Army requirement for a weapon of this type, and it's really aimed primarily at the export market. And it's worth noting that the Mandus Group is also heavily involved in upgrading and overhauling the M198 155mm gun, which has now been replaced in US Army service by the BAE Systems M777. As usual, there are a lot of stands showing armour solutions, and what came to my attention was that you've got to engage with the experts in armour solutions when you design the vehicle, because sometimes it is difficult to add on this new armour. You can perhaps best to design it into the vehicle. This interesting slide really shows the three different generations of armour solutions. At the bottom one is what we call bar armour or slat armour, and Connected actually say they've seen photographs of this far back as 1943-44 on Russian T-34 tanks. The middle one is the original QNet, which again is against RPGs, and they've sold about 10,000 vehicles set for those. And the top one is the latest generation QNet 2, and this is said to have a lot of advantages over the original one, including being lighter in weight, more easy to install on the vehicle. And this is one part of a complete family of armour solutions now being marketed by Connected, which include blast ride, blast mitigation seating, spore liners inside of vehicles, breakaway transparent armour so the crews can actually get out of the vehicle, scalable metallic composite armour, vehicle mounted gunfire detection system, and egress lighting system. They also showed some of their armours which can actually be attached to the vehicle with magnets, and people couldn't get them off. You can actually put it on the vehicle quickly. If it gets damaged, take it off. So that applied to some of their armour systems. Even the netting was actually attached to the vehicle with magnets, and some very strong chaps tried to pry it off the vehicle and they couldn't. So that to me was quite interesting. And the final slide was a bit of a surprise to me, because the Turkish company of Roketsan are really the missile systems house of Turkey. They started many years ago making parts of the Stinger missile for Europe. They've actually done a lot of assembly work on Rapier missiles. They've also developed a 2.75-inch laser-guided rocket for helicopters, which is now in production. They've also developed medium and long-range anti-tank guided missiles, and they did show this low-altitude air defense missile system, which is being developed to meet the requirements of the Turkish Land Forces Command. A Selsan of the overall prime contractor, but Roketsan is actually doing the missiles. And I really was most surprised to see this at the show, because I expected them to unveil it during the big exhibition in Turkey in 2013. So that was quite surprising. It just gives you a flavour that in the past Turks tended to buy in material, but nowadays they have developed a lot of technology, both in missiles, armoured fighting vehicles, their new tank, and I think they have now started to win export orders. So I think that really sums me up on the vehicle front and some missiles. And I'd like to now hand over to Giles Ebbett, editor of Jane's C4I, who I'm quite sure will bring us up to date on some of the more interesting C4I developments.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, or good morning for those across the pond. Yes, there were some some interesting bits and pieces. Nothing huge. A lot of minor updates to programs and so on. Of course, the major step forward as far as the U.S. Army, recent step forward as far as the U.S. Army is concerned, has been WIN-T, the Warfighter Information Net Tactical, passing its IOT&E at the Network Integration Evaluation 12.2, which means, or increment 2 rather, which means that that's now being fielded. And there was much relief and muted celebration amongst one or two contractors, notably GD, of course. And talk now of work on reducing size, weight, and power of some of the elements within increment 2, and factors of 10 reduction of those elements were being talked about, particularly because of the need to get some of the kit into armoured vehicles in the heavy BCTs, into Abrams and so on, which I understand wasn't in the originally part of the aim. And GD had some stuff on display, routers and the like, which stuff that was currently in 19-inch racks, and developmental equipment that was now in boxes a foot square. So clearly lots of scope there for SWAT production. And GD were also talking about making much greater use of Wi-Fi, their Fortress Wi-Fi radio, to provide the final tactical 500 meters, so to speak, tactical mile, within increment 2. L3 also celebrating, because they, of course, provide the modem, the SATCOM modem in increment 2. And their next order is for more than 500 modems, and also 250 to 300 on the SATCOM on the move antennas. So they were naturally very pleased with the contract award. As always, there was examples of individual soldier system equipment and around and about. And one that did catch my eye, not a US Army program, but was on the DRS on the Finmechanica stand, but from DRS Technologies Canada. Their Wolf system, which is illustrated there on the slide, which is their bid for the Canadian Army's Integrated Soldier System Program. It's interesting because they've approached the problem from a slightly different direction than many other people, in that they're using it's an overall Finmechanica solution, and they're using the Celex LSAG Frontline Soldier Radio, which is out of the personal role radio stable, but the whole system is, as they put it, radio-centric, in that everything, or most of the functionality, is concentrated into the radio. So not only is there a voice and data communications, but also the radio has its own computer module inside, which runs battle management software, and it also is used as the audio bridge if you need to use a second radio, and so on. So the display is dumb. The radio has its own battery, so the system battery merely keeps that topped up. And so what it means is that no matter what else goes wrong, you still have your radio, and it's all concentrated on that single piece of equipment. And as the guy talking to me said, no matter what else goes, you will always have voice communications. And they're working very much on the basis that in high-tempo, low-level infantry tactical operations, voice is the principal method of command, and so that is what you need more than anything else. And under those circumstances, you don't command from a little screen. You command using your voice. So it'll be interesting to see how that gets on in the competition. Down select is in early 2013, and that's one of 5 contenders. The other 4, I have no idea how the proposal is going, how the competition is going at the moment. On the same theme, Northrop Grumman gave me an update on what they're now calling Soldier Link, which was their advanced meshnet technology system, which performed apparently quite well on NIE 12.1. They've updated the sleeve that encompasses the smartphone that they use, and improved the connection, the cable connection, which apparently was a weak point. But the Radiant radio, meshnet radio they used, apparently gave them a rock solid network at the low level. And next time around, they're going to use an updated radio, but they hope to go back on NIE 13.2 to see how they get on. They remain hopeful that the Soldier radio isn't the only horse in the race as far as that is concerned. One interesting individual radio I picked up deep in the Korean pavilion was INSOPAC's Wing, which is a duplex UHF Soldier radio, which is being fielded to the South Korean Army. I've not seen it before, but it popped out of nowhere. And also that is going to be, apparently, the radio in the South Korean Army's future soldier system, which is being developed in partnership with Samsung Thales. There is not a competition. That's the only system being developed. And that is due apparently for fielding in 2014, 2015, and we'll see how that develops. One other individual system which also caught my eye, although it's not new per se, was Raytheon's Aviation Warrior, which was developed or appeared at Farnborough just after the contract award, or the engineering development contract was awarded, but as was being given pride of place. It moves on from Raytheon's electronic data manager, the electronic knee pad, which has been around for getting on for 10 years in various incarnations, and I think over 6,000 have been issued. But this goes very much further. On the left, you can see 3 exciting-looking boxes. The one on the right, the green one, is the soldier computing model, which sits on the individual, and then the one on the left, the bigger of the 2 displays, goes into the cockpit, and then the one in the middle, that's the mounted to display module, and then the one in the middle is the personal display module, which goes on the wrist, and means that if the user has to dismount, if he's away from the helicopter, he retains the display and the degree of situational awareness, and so on. The other interesting thing about this system is the common helmet-mounted display, which you can, if you look on the picture on the right, on the left-hand side of the helmet is a little see-through, a little transparent screen, and that provides a kind of individual head-up display, which gives you the same display as on the others, which means that I suppose it's slightly analogous to the monocular that an infantryman might have, but very much attuned to the aviation or the pilot requirement. But it means that the pilot has always got that available, where he's not always looking. He doesn't always have to look down into the cockpit or down at his wrist or whatever it may be. So that was quite interesting on the individual side of life. One other thing that I did notice, and if we could have the next slide, please. It's again, it's not new, and there are always these sort of things at AUSA and indeed at other exhibitions. But there are always solutions being produced to provide rapid response communications capabilities or mobile command centers. But it's noticeable that increasingly these are now providing mobile cell capability, Wi-Fi, SATCOM, that sort of thing. This was one of the ones on show, which is PowerWave's Rapid Flex Mobile Deployment Unit. The thing that looks like a rail gun or something is actually a mast, which elevates, and you can see right at the top the cell antennae or antennas. And a similar sort of capability with CACI's Rapid Response Mobile Communications Platform. What's interesting is these are not only being offered as a military solution, perhaps for forward operating bases and that sort of thing, but both firms talked about their use as gap fillers for border surveillance or area surveillance or whatever it might be. So clearly filling in those areas where fixed communications don't exist. The point being that if you're surging into a particular area or whatever it may be, you can then provide the high capacity communications that this sort of thing brings. And again, it's relevant perhaps particularly today for first responders and disaster relief. Very much a useful capability. Apart from that, nothing tremendous caught my eye. The various communications programs, but no major announcements. And on that, I will hand over to, I think, Jeff Fine, who's going to talk a bit about radars.
And could I have the next slide? Oh, there we go. Good day. Let's see here. Lockheed Martin took the opportunity at AUSA to announce that they're going to equip their Q-53 radar, which the Army is currently using. That was the former Q-36. They're going to put an air surveillance capability into this. It's something that Lockheed Martin has said the radar has had, which the Army just hasn't had a requirement for. But the U.S. Army is now interested in adding that capability, and Lockheed says at about mid-2013 they should have that up and running. In the meantime, they're also eyeing this a request for proposal from the Canadian Army for a ground CRAM radar with air surveillance capability. And what I found interesting is that on the one side is the Lockheed Martin Q-53, a rather large radar, and Northrop Grumman has their smaller Hammer radar, which is made out of. It's currently in a it's currently in a demonstration down in Huntsville, Alabama, with the Army. There is no program of record for it, but they've taken some of their air surveillance radars and put them into a small system that they can mount on the top of the Humvee. And they're also eyeing the Canadian RFP for their ground surveillance, air surveillance system. And that was one of the things I found interesting this year, was that there were a few companies that were beginning to take air systems and bring them down to the ground level. L3 in particular had a couple of programs that they were working on for situational awareness radars and for reconnaissance and surveillance systems that were coming right out of their aircraft systems. And basically, as they said to me, they're just turning the systems upside down and putting them on the top of Humvees. And one was a IR camera, which offers a panoramic view. And they're able to fuse these images together, or stitch them together, as they say, and to create actually a full-motion video from about 24 very quick shots. And they had that on display. It was quite interesting technology to see. The other one is something they call the MXRSTA, which is a new EOIR system that they're, again, taking from their airborne systems and looking to put on ground vehicles or forward operating bases. But one thing both these systems have in common, and the 360-degree image program is called Night Conqueror. Both of these, L3 was eyeing for Navy programs, which I thought at an Army show is rather interesting. They're looking to field both of these on unmanned surface vehicles. And one program is in the IR camera actually is in testing with the U.S. Navy right now on unmanned surface vehicles. The MXRSTA, L3 says that they actually have 2 bids and not within the United States. They're looking at 2 Middle Eastern nations to sell this to. The one other program that I found of interest was Raytheon's J-Lens, which is the offers target quality data on it's anti-cruise missile defense and swarming small boats. And they've been doing a number of demonstrations throughout 2012 to show its capability. And they also announced at AUSA that they were able to track and pass on targeting data on swarming boats to a number of defense network systems. And the program is kind of in limbo because there really is uncertainty about where this will end up. It is funded as an Army program, but the Navy shows that they have a lot of interest in this. But it's the 4th successful test they've shown this year on this capability, which is mounted on an aerostat. And let's see here. I think that was it from what I saw. And, you know, I kind of chime in with the same thing as my colleagues say. It was a rather flat show. Nothing startling in the that I came across from any contracts. Most of these programs, that, with the exception of the Q-53, there were no contracts in the United States Army for any of these. So that was really unusual to me to see that. And that's it for my piece. I'm ready to pass this on.
Okay, well, we're going to stay in the U.S. and hopefully we'll have Marina on the line to talk about some Army aviation programs. Marina?
Okay, thanks, Nick. I hope everyone can hear me. There's very little news to report on aviation programs. One of the rare exceptions to that is the Armed Aerial Scout program. The Army is currently studying whether or not it intends to upgrade its Kiowa Warriors or open up a new competition to replace the aging fleet. So at this point, most of the companies that intend to compete for the potential contract have completed a voluntary flight demonstration program, and the Army has said that it is reviewing all that data and trying to make a decision by the end of the year as to whether or not it would like to upgrade or replace the current fleet. So, and the only other bit of news that I have on aviation programs is the Apache. The Block 3 program has been given the green light by the Pentagon to go into full-rate production, and the Army has decided to rename the Block 3 the E model, so it's going to be the AH-64E, and Boeing is preparing to go into full-rate production with it. And that's it for me, and I guess I'll hand it off to Dan Wasserly at this point.
Hey, thanks, Marina. I hope everyone can hear me as well. I've kind of been dropping in and out here. But just sort of to give my 30,000-foot view of the conference and some of the takeaways, I thought it seemed sort of tough for Army leaders and planners to speak too much about the upcoming budget and strategic issues, as there's really a significant degree of uncertainty about all of those things right now. There's the upcoming presidential election, which could really turn the strategy and budgeting around about 180 degrees. The Army also just released its Army 2020 strategy. There's still no budget yet in the FY13. They're expecting to just kind of move forward on continuing resolutions. And probably most significantly, the potential for sequestration and other effects from the 2011 Budget Control Act that's meant to rein in federal spending are still unknowns. So at the conference, Army Secretary John McHugh said the Army is studying the Budget Control Act to sort of understand what sort of flexibility the service might have in applying those cuts if they're triggered, which would happen on 2 January. So once the Army figures out how it can apply the cuts, it will begin to prioritize its programs and its funding accounts. But it should be noted that in fiscal year 13, the service would not really have flexibility. All of its accounts, except for personnel and for operations, would be reduced by a not too specified percentage number, although that's estimated right now to be somewhere around 9.4 to 10%. As far as acquisition goes, some of the interesting themes that emerged at the show was the Army's place in the Pentagon's so-called rebalancing to Asia or pivoting to Asia. There was definitely a discernible effort by the Army to show it's not just the Air Force and the Navy leading this, but that the Army has a big part in it as well. But specific to how the rebalance might affect acquisitions, Army officials have identified a couple areas. Heidi Shu, who's the acquisition executive for the service, said air and missile defense, cyber defense, and counter jamming might stand out as some potentially key capabilities for the Army in the Asia-Pacific area. Basically, based on the idea that in numerous locations, but particularly in Asia, the Army expects a more contested environment than it has seen in recent counterinsurgency operations. So Ms. Shu mentioned that states in the Asia-Pacific region generally have access to missiles, to offensive cyber weapons, and to signals jamming equipment. So accordingly, the Army would need to prepare itself for operations that might require air and missile defense, network and cyber defense, or tools to sort of better manage the electromagnetic spectrum and mitigate jamming activities, especially as the force tries to become more networked. As far as some of the major Army programs, I thought some of the buzz at AUSA continued to suggest that the Office of the Secretary of Defense, or at least planners in the Pentagon, are not entirely sold on the ground combat vehicle program. And this isn't too surprising since OSD did mandate that the acquisition approach for GCV starts to look at some of the, I think they were calling them non-developmental vehicles. They looked at some foreign platforms, an Israeli one, the CV-90, things like this. And the Army is now drafting a final report on its study of those vehicles, but the GCV program manager said at the conference that he hasn't yet seen any of those that embody the key requirements they're looking for in an off-the-shelf non-developmental platform. So that's still up in the air. As far as the MRAP program, another interesting thing that emerged at the conference was that the Army expects to complete in November a study that will tell how those vehicles will be positioned within the force in the future, and that should allow the Army to do some better long-term sustainment planning. But notably, the program executive officer who oversees MRAPs told us at the conference that the study is looking at every course of action, and this could include reducing the number of MRAP variants in the Army, or somehow finding a mission and role for every one of them. But for now, I will turn it over to Nelson Fisk. So, Nelson, it's all you.
Thanks, Dan. Good morning, everybody. I'm sorry, but I don't have slides, so I'll try to be descriptive and also be brief, as I'm conscious of the time here. And just briefly, AUSA was good this year, but as everyone has said, the budgets are affecting things, vehicles as well as attendees. Less Army attendance, completely new vehicles. There really weren't as many that I expected, but there was innovation on display, and things that caught my eye were, for the most part, adaptive. So I just picked three to illustrate that. And first was the AMPV, Armored Multi-Purpose Vehicle, that John already covered. And this, just so you know, is the replacement for the M113, about 6,000 vehicles. Prior to AUSA, it looked like BAE had possibly the only or the best entry with their modified Bradley. And I know John covered it, so I'll just cover the part of this I think is interesting, and that is that, General Dynamics had what I consider a great alternative as well with their Stryker plus TR, which stands for track. It's a Stryker double V-hull, so it's got that added protection. And it also fills a void for medium vehicles in their offerings at the same time. So just as an off note here, that if they're not selected for AMPV, as anybody, who knows who's really going to be selected here, but if they're not, General Dynamics does have something they could, if they desire to, develop into a medium offering going forward. But ultimately, this is good for the Army because of the competition. GD has 5 variants, general purpose command and control mortar, and then 2 medical variants, one for evac, one for treatment. That's compatible with the Stryker, obviously, so it's not going to be a logistical burden for the Army or whoever buys it. The only issue is the demonstrator track. They're still experimenting. The one on display was not going to be the final one, or I mean, potentially could be. They could go with an M113 style track or a variant of that. It's in inventory. It probably wouldn't take a great deal of modification. Or they could, of course, go with something more akin to an M1, or they could develop something separately. I think it also comes in, around 42 tons. So the only question really in my mind is the track. If they modify it, that'll be a short-term solution and it'll be quickly ready, as the Bradley variant is ready. The track could support the Stryker, so I don't see any problem there. The only issue is if they decide to go with possibly an upgraded or better track, it might take a bit more time to test or really just to validate for the Army's acceptance. But I don't think that is a showstopper. I think both vehicles are good and the competition is good. Bradley's vehicle, they've changed it since last year a bit, but ultimately it's ready to go. It's not a V-shaped or double V hull, so that's maybe one drawback. But I think ultimately the Army has two great options here. If Stryker or Bradley option is selected, and it's possible for the Army, they could select another option. And I think, in the past they were still discussing, well, we really could go wheeled, but I just think that's less likely. There's more of a need for some medium weight vehicle, and I think really it comes down to budgets. And just stepping back for a minute, I think the innovation at AUSA was good, and I don't think we would have seen it if budgets and economies were doing really well. We wouldn't have seen some of these things. So the only issue there is the track, and I think that's easily addressed by General Dynamics. They have many solutions. I think all of them will work, and I think ultimately the Army is going to benefit here with the increased competition. Either way, they're going to have a lot of commonality, whichever they select, because the vehicles, both in the case of the Bradley and the Stryker, are proven, they work, and the parts are in the inventory. The next thing I thought was interesting was Plaison's Flex Fence. This is an innovative, light, RPG defeating technology. It attaches, it's basically like a thick green or desert-colored pad that can attach to almost any vehicle type. And it doesn't even have to be a vehicle. You could attach it to a building or an ammo supply point, fuel point, you name it. And it provides standoff and defeats the RPG rounds. It's a little bit different than the existing slat armor type solutions in that the same area has less points that interfere with the defeating capability. So its overall defeating capability is improved. The person I spoke to said 30%. I'll leave that up to the opinions on the data, but logically it seems like it would have a better defeating capability. It's a passive solution, 20 pounds per square meter. It's very light, so it can be mounted to anything. And I think what's great about it is, from a vehicle standpoint, it doesn't add any stress to the suspension. It doesn't cause soldiers long switch-out periods. It's not hard to do. I asked the guy if you could basically just take some straps and, in a field-expedient manner, hang it on a door of a vehicle and even just tape it. As long as you have standoff between the pad and the vehicle, it would work. So you could put anything in between the pad and the vehicle. So I like it. It's also can be shaped, made into any dimension. So it can be fitted to anything from light vehicles up to naval ships. Of course, you can't drape the entire vessel with it. But the drawback is it's really only for RPGs, so it has limited capabilities. But anywhere where you see a slat armor solution, it could be used. Like I said, it's very easy to install. And I think if there were more soldiers there, you would have got sort of a ground level feedback that they would probably like it a lot. You could also just carry a pad with you and carry some within the squads or on vehicles and use them expeditiously. The last thing I wanted to cover, we always talk about vehicles, but there are also some trucks there, and one that caught my eye was Daimler's M915A3 heavy dump truck. And it caught my eye because it has a hydraulic lift, and I wasn't originally going to get so deeply into it, but I watched the video and I talked to the person, and it was very interesting that, again, this is an innovation sort of on the logistical side. It's got a proprietary tailgate, and it can open up fully. It can remain closed, or it can open any point in between. And that combined with the tilting capability was really impressive. It can show, the truck could basically unload whatever you have in it much faster. A forklift can drive up to the back of it and load through the tailgate because it's completely out of the way. And I'm sorry again for no pictures, but if you imagine a dump truck with its bed tilted up at a greater than 45-degree angle and the tailgate opens slightly, as the truck moves forward, the material is spread evenly. So it can be spread uniformly across a wide area without the use of another vehicle. So it's kind of neat that this truck, in some cases, can take the place of another vehicle. And it's really easy to operate. It can be used in forward areas as well. It's very durable. And as I said, it takes the place of a few vehicles under certain circumstances. So ultimately, there was a lot of innovation at AUSA, and I picked three just to give you an idea: the Plaisance Flex Fence, General Dynamics AMPV entry, and this dump truck by Daimler, M91583. I think they're all three innovative and good, and I think you're going to see more things like this if our budgets continue to have problems. That's all I had, folks. So I'm going to turn it back over to Nick Brown. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Vix. It turns out that we've actually got quite a lot to say, so we've overrun slightly. But we do have a few questions, so we'll counter through those quickly. If anybody else has any more questions or any questions that we don't get to right now, you should see our emails up on the screen, so do feel free to get in touch. The first question up was probably for John or Dan. We've covered, it was about the status of GCV and JLTV. Now I think we've probably covered GCV now, unless you guys have got anything else to add. But what about the status of JLTV? Could you just talk us through where that is right now?
Yeah, I mean, I'll go first quickly. I had a chat with each of the three companies who are currently in the EMD stage, having had their awards earlier in the year. All of them are pretty much in the same place. They're all starting to build their vehicles for the actual assessment phase. They're building 22 vehicles each, and they're due in about 10 months, I believe. And then we'll have a testing phase that lasts for about 12 months. Lockheed Martin as well have said they've delivered their blast coupons, which are sort of stripped down hulls for IED testing. And that was really it. It sort of is quite a quiet phase at the moment while they all beaver away and get ready for testing and then what's going to happen there. I don't know if Dan's got anything else to say.
Yeah, just that pretty much sums it up. I mean, it's a couple months now into its 27-month engineering and manufacturing development phase, so they're just kind of waiting on I think it's 22 prototype vehicles, and trailers and data and stuff like that need to be delivered. And then the competition will actually open up again for the next phase, so other companies could notionally compete again. And then ground combat vehicle, I think one of the questions touched on it. It's about halfway through its technology development phase, and I think they're expecting a request for proposals for the next phase to be released sometime, I think they said early third quarter of FY13. So that should be moving along sometime next year.
Okay, good stuff. Thanks, Dan. Next up is another question related to GCV, but more specifically related to the hybrid side of things. So I'm guessing that Pete and Chris, you guys are probably best placed, because I know that you both spent time with BAE. But the question was asking if we've got any more commentary along the amount of risk that BAE is bringing into the program with its hybrid drive. Because just 4 years ago, as the questioner points out, 2 electric drive offers were binned from the JLTV program. So those were basically got rid of on the basis of them being too risky. So where do you think BAE's GCV hybrid situation takes us now?
Well, yeah, that's a very interesting question. And GCV has also failed in a contest in Sweden, has it not, Chris?
Yeah, a hybrid electric drive was one of the drive lines for SEP, which was both tracked and wheeled. In the end, they also had what they called a wide drive, which is a conventional mechanical drive with engines in both sponsons. Certainly, it was also for future combat system, but BAE Systems have really nailed their colours to the mast on this one. There's no way going back. It's going to be hybrid electric drive. They think it really demonstrates a lot of advantages, which it does in in how you actually package it. Because if you look at like a tank, a third or a quarter of the vehicle is stuck with its power pack. And even on a this type of track vehicle, there's a lot of saving of space because people want more volume, more payload, more protection, and more power. And certainly hybrid electric drive does give some of those. The actual engines shouldn't be a problem because they're MTU. The kinetic element is a scaled-up version of what they put in future combat system. So they reckon the advantages outweigh the disadvantages. I must admit, in Europe, there's been not a lot of interest in hybrid electric drive. It's probably like the jet engine in aircraft. The first one that does it might have problems, but anybody follows. So I think from the engineering point of view, hybrid electric drive does offer a number of significant advantages to the user, particularly the space inside the vehicle. They've got to get 9 dismounts and 3 men and their equipment, and that takes up a lot of volume. So if you can save anything on the power pack, putting them in the sponsors, it does help a lot. So they have nailed their colours from us. I think hybrid electric drive might be the way ahead for this particular vehicle.
Well, it's interesting because, hybrid electric drive is not new. In fact, if you go to the Bovington Tank Museum down on Salisbury Plain and you look in there, there's a tank which is the heaviest tank in the museum. It's over 80 tons. The TOG-2 developed in the early 1940s, and that had hybrid drive. But it is interesting that they really are pinning their colours to the mast. I wasn't aware until I went to that briefing that they absolutely will not offer an alternative, a conventionally driven alternative. So, as Chris said, they're really putting all their eggs in one basket there.
Almost like back to the M1 where one contractor offered a turbine, one offered a diesel, and they stuck with the turbine all the way through. And even now, the turbine for the M1 hasn't been produced for something like 10 or 15 years, and now looking at diesel. They've already put a Europack in an Abrams for Turkey, but this is different. So it does offer a lot of advantages in this particular type of vehicle. They want to save weight. They said it saves 3 tons. It saves weight and volume. So for this particular vehicle, where they've got to put a lot of crew in it, it might be the way ahead.
Yeah, and BAE are saying that if you look to the future, there's a lot of really power-hungry technologies that these vehicles are going to have to take on board. And that could be everything from electric armour systems to laser weapons, for example. And so they're saying that the advantages of that onboard high volume power is really what the DoD is starting to look at as being something that's necessary.
Yeah.
And that helps their cause.
It was also on the tracer reconnaissance vehicles. I mean, they were on Salisbury Plain. They were running around under electric power, rubber band tracks. You couldn't hear them. I was in South Africa. They've got a Roycat hybrid electric drive, and that ran on its diesel engine. Suddenly shut off, and it went past. You wouldn't know it was there. So there are a lot of advantages, but it could, for some people, be still risky. But BAE Systems obviously think it's the way ahead to go.
Yeah.
Cool. Good stuff. Thanks,
Time will tell.
Yep, absolutely. If anybody's still interested in vehicle power, then I strongly recommend that you hunt out a feature article that ran in the last issue of International Defence Review, which I would say was a good read since I wrote it. But we'll gloss over that. Getting away from vehicles quickly, I thought that we might see some more command and control type systems that would be looking to try and exploit Windows 8 since that was released last week. I saw very little that actually was looking ahead to that kind of stuff. Panasonic had a new Toughbook style tablet out that was looking to take advantage of some of the touchscreen stuff. But Giles, did you pick up on anything else that was looking to try and take advantage of Windows 8 or any of the new OSs?
In a short no. The thing is, particularly for AUSA, the Army's mandated Android for the handhelds, and so that's the way it's going to be, I suppose.
Yeah, I guess so.
If Dan knows different, then doubtless he can pipe up. But the short answer is no, I didn't actually. The last new tablet I saw was the Harris one, which appeared at Eurosatory. That was new there. And the jury is still, as far as the handheld that's going with Net Warrior, and that's really small stuff. They still, I gather, I had a long chat with DRS separate to my one with the Wolf. And as I understand it, there is still no decision between GD's 300 computer and DRS's H2, which were the two handhelds that were run in the NIE to go with NetWarrior. But sorry, having blabbered, the short answer is no, I didn't.
Okay, well maybe that'll be around next year once Windows 8 is properly established and things. But I think you're probably right that the Android does seem to be the future for now. One last quick question to Chris then. Somebody was looking for more information on Rocket Sans SAM, in particular towards the guidance. Did you have any more info on that?
Yeah, well, the overall prime contractor for those missiles is Selsan. They're responsible for the radar, the command control, and they're also doing, for this particular rocket, from memory, it's IR, imaging infrared seeker.
Okay.
The whole system is rather like vertical launch meter, but it is an imaging infrared seeker.
Did they say if it was cooled or uncooled?
Didn't say that. I think it did surprise me they chose AUSA just to show this. I think all being well at the big exhibition in Istanbul next year, you should see a lot more on this and some of the other tracker systems. But as far as I know, the Selsan imaging infrared seeker.
Okay, good stuff. Well, thank you everybody for hanging on and letting us overrun like this. Perhaps to end up on a high point or a positive thought, I think Nelson's note about austerity perhaps being the mother of innovation is probably an interesting one. So hopefully that as we go forward, we'll still be able to see interesting and new uses of technology. People have to try and make the most of the money. If there are any more questions, then we will try and get back to you after the webinar. But for now, that's us out of time. Thanks for your attendance. And our next webinar is looking at the Southeast Asian defense markets, and that's on the 22nd of November. So we look forward to welcoming you back then.